Greetings, Gatehouse Insiders. I am back with another episode of Gatehouse Insights. In this episode, I'm joined by Simon Barber. Simon is going to shed some light on flexible working arrangements, why he transitioned from private practice to in-house, what skills are needed to succeed as an in-house lawyer, and the challenges he faces on a day-to-day basis. And make sure you subscribe to the Gatehouse Legal Recruitment YouTube channel to catch it all. So I wanted to begin with flexible working arrangements. And I want to find out from you how you've incorporated flexible working arrangements into your career and what's worked well for you and what hasn't worked well for you.
Yeah, so for me, it was really only the arrival of my two children that's required some access to flexible work arrangements with my current employer and my previous employer, Specsavers. So it's really only been for the last 2 or 3 years, but that's involved some flexible starting and finishing times to allow for childcare pickups, and also some working from home, also to allow for those pickups and drop-offs, but also, when one of the kids is sick, you're able to, keep up your work as well as meet your commitments at home. And it's also been around trying to achieve some balance now that, work's busy, life at home is busy. So I feel like I've been able to do that a lot better with flexible work.
Because both you and your wife work full-time?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So it's often the case that one of us will do the drop-off and one will do the pickup. So I might start a bit later and finish a bit later, or vice versa. So one of the things I did at Specsavers was start at 8 in the morning and finish at sort of 4:30 in order to pick my eldest son, Jack, up from work. So that's something that worked really well.
Yeah. Over the last, 3 years, anything that hasn't worked well that you needed to reassess?
Not that hasn't worked well, but I think it makes your time in the office really compressed, because you sort of can't sit there until 6:30 or 7 o'clock to figure out a problem or complete an urgent matter. Like, you really have to be really productive whilst you're there, and then obviously get out, on time or as close to on time as possible, and then meet your family commitments.
Yeah. And would it be fair to say that, flexible working arrangements is not a one-size-fit-all approach, and it needs to vary for different, individuals?
Yeah, I think it definitely varies for individuals, and also at different times of individuals' lives. From my experience, I happily went along in my career without access to flexible working for 10 or 12 years. So it's really been in the last three or so years, with the arrival of children, that I have, sought to incorporate that into my professional life. Yeah. But it's just different for the individual. They might have someone at home that needs care, or they might have young children, or they might have school-age children. So there's a whole range of sort of needs, and as people progress through their lives, I think, it can't be a one-size-fits-all, or we've agreed this now, so this is going to be the case forever and a day. I think it just needs to change, with the individual and the workplace.
Yeah. From your point of view, what can firms or companies do to provide more, flexible working arrangements more accessible to their employees, or make it easier for them?
Yeah, so I think there's two components of flexible work, and one is understanding what the legal requirement is under the Fair Work Act. So what is an employer obliged to provide? When can an employee request flexible working, and on what grounds? And also on what grounds you can refuse a request for flexible work. So there's that sort of legal obligation for an employer. But I think more and more these days, it's just becoming best practice to make these flexible working available. And that's because I don't think companies can afford to sort of miss out on talent because they're a bit rigid or inflexible in their approach. By way of example, one of the requirements is that you've worked at your employer for 12 months. But I don't think it's the case that, someone is going to deny an employee, flexible working on the basis that they've only worked with you for 8 or 9 months. Like, I don't think that's very realistic. And there's also quite a limited range of legal grounds for access in the Fair Work Act. So sort of 5 or 6 points.
Yeah.
So some people may not fit inside of those points. So you're going to say, again, no, we won't allow it. So I think you need a policy that complies with the legal requirements, but is also flexible enough to manage your employees and your talent.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%, because what we're seeing is, I suppose, talent have so many opportunities and they're just going to leave and go to another organisation that gives them those benefits. So I feel like companies do need to be a little bit more flexible in their working arrangements.
Yeah, I think that's definitely the case. And I think one of the things that will help both employee and employer is having a flexible working policy. And that really makes it transparent as to, who can access it and when, and, what the process is to discuss with your manager or apply, as it were.
Yeah.
What the timing is for a response. So an employer has to respond within 21 days of a request, and they have to set out reasons if the request is refused. So it's not sufficient just to say, no, we can't accommodate it. So that's, again, something to be mindful of from an employer.
Yeah, interesting. Lots to take into account there.
Definitely.
Moving on to your current role as a corporate counsel.
Yeah.
Could you share some of the reasons why you transitioned from, I suppose, private practice to in-house, an in-house role?
Yeah, so I've been in-house for a number of years. So I've worked with Suzanne Corporation doing their leasing, and then that transitioned into the role with Specsavers. I was there for a number of years, almost 10 years, and I've recently taken up a new opportunity with Punt Hill Apartments. So that's all been really exciting. And I think one of the attractions, and probably most people that are in-house will say this, is working directly with the business and, going on the journey with the business. So for me, that was a really attractive way to work. And once I'd secured one in-house role, I sort of wanted to continue on that career path rather than private practice.
A lot of people have a view that, in-house is a little bit is easier than private practice. From your experience, do you see that to be the case, or do you have a different point of view there?
Yeah, I think one of the big things that makes people sort of seek in-house is the lack of billables. So it's probably easier in that respect. But it can still be demanding. But you probably, in my experience, probably not putting in as many hours as probably those in private practice.
Yeah.
So it can be, it can be more attractive in terms of achieving that balance, whilst not sort of giving up the quality of work that you want to do.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So from your experience over the last 11 years, what skills have you found to be really critical to succeed in your role?
Yeah, I think in any legal practice, technical skills are important, but in-house, it's really paramount to understand the business that you're working with, understand their commercial drivers, their competitors, their space in the market, and really just that sort of stakeholder management, that you don't just have one thing you're working on. You've got many different stakeholders, many different tasks at any one time. So skills that are important in legal practice generally, time management, relationship management, are really sort of brought to the forefront when you're practicing in-house.
Yeah. And in terms of, I suppose, challenges, like what are your day-to-day challenges that you face as an in-house lawyer?
Yeah, I think the expectation when a company invests in in-house, whether it be one person like in my current role or a whole team, is that there is a pretty high expectation that a lot of the work is handled in-house. So a lot of the time that can take you out of your comfort zone or away from areas where you've traditionally practiced and you're more familiar with. So I've done a lot of work in the property space, managing leasing portfolios, for example, with Specsavers in particular. But just sort of haven't had the same opportunities to explore different areas. So that's one of the great things about my current role, is that I am getting opportunities to, expand my areas of knowledge. So that's something that's been really good.
Yeah, interesting that you say that. When they do have an in-house legal team, companies do expect everything to be done in-house.
That's right.
At what point can you go to external law firms for expert advice?
Yeah, I think when there's, I think obviously if you don't have the expertise and it's not something that's readily attained, you just have to look at, the risk inherent in the situation or the transaction to sort of make that judgment call as to whether you handle the money yourself or brief out to an external firm. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And I suppose a lot of lawyers have ambitions to reach senior levels, such as yourself.
Yeah.
How have you done it? What advice can you give them? How do they get there?
Yeah, my advice, and I hope I've obtained some level of seniority. I've never really reflected on that. But my advice would be to be open-minded about where opportunities come and where they can lead you. So I took a contract role with Suzanne Corporation, which essentially led to me working for Specsavers for almost 10 years. So and that was largely on account of the leasing experience that I'd developed, and sort of acting reasonably independently in-house.
And there you have it. Another episode of Gatehouse Insights draws to an end. Thank you for watching, and thank you for sharing this video with your friends. And if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the Gatehouse Legal Recruitment YouTube channel, where you can see more.